All right, hello everyone. My name is Moritz Bierling, as you know, and today I'm going to be talking about what you see here on the screen, which is decentralized culture, memes as group coordination mechanisms. And this is a presentation that I prepared over a month or so, actually like 3 weeks ago, for a kind of a small group of people in an investment house who regularly invite speakers to give talks about various topics to do mostly with resources like gold, silver, investing in other things. And actually that house is called the Austrian Asset Management. No, IFAM, so Institute for Austrian Asset Management, that's it. Sorry. So yeah, I'm just going to go through this. You can see in the description the link to the Evernote presentation that I have there, and you can click through it as we go along or later on as you wish. And I'm going to just expound on what I see memes as and how they work and all that kind of stuff, where they come from beautifully. So with that, let's get started. And let's start with a definition, of course. I'm sure you've all heard of Richard Dawkins, and he defines memes as the smallest unit of cultural transmission. And this definition actually comes from, I believe, his book, The Selfish Gene, where he first coined the term meme, and that has since entered the public perception. And it's kind of to do with kind of the smallest unit that of behavior, basically, that a human can transmit to another human by imitation or by basically that somebody can learn from somebody else by seeing somebody else do it in some way, shape, or form, or through other artifacts. And then, of course, it has morphed into the popular usage that we are familiar with today, which is funny pictures on the internet, basically. But there's much more to these funny pictures on the internet, and I'm going to show you some examples, how they evolved. But let's continue on. The Urban Dictionary actually defines a meme as an idea, belief, or belief system, or pattern of behavior that spreads, very important here, throughout a culture, either vertically by cultural inheritance, as by parents to children, or horizontally by cultural acquisition, as by peers, information media, and entertainment media. And then there's a second definition, a pervasive thought or thought pattern that replicates itself via cultural memes, a parasitic code, a virus of the mind, especially contagious to children and the impressionable. So I've kind of bolded here the crucial takeaway, which is a pattern of behavior that spreads. And of course, we're all familiar with the memes that spread on social media because they're so easily shareable. They have an impression on your eyes and on your mind. And that's actually, yeah, that's the key feature. These are things that spread. And in a way, there's a saying that people don't have ideas, ideas have people, and this very much applies here as well. So keep that in mind as we go through. Then we have the context. I kind of want to give you a little bit of context before we dive into the memes themselves to understand where they come from and why they work the way they work. So I actually wrote a primer on the emerging discipline of alternate reality design, which is kind of the phenomenon behind the discipline behind the phenomenon of Pokemon Go. I'm sure you've all heard of Pokemon Go. This kind of crazy trend that like a flash hit the world last year and then basically was gone in like 2 months or something like that. But that is kind of it's a beautiful example of this emerging discipline called alternate reality design, which is all about using digital media and any kind of artifacts to craft a kind of fake experience that people will actually take part in and that will instruct them into action. And so you can already see here, these memes are not just for passive entertainment purposes, but they can actually instruct people to action, and keep that in mind for the later political stuff. So one quote I made in that primer was that the scope of human activity surpassed human scale. And what that means is that, as you've probably heard, there's this kind of, how do you call that? The Dunbar's number, exactly. So the number of people that we are able to keep in mind at the same time that we can have a relationship with, meaningful relationship with, It's around 150 to 200, 250 people. Like these numbers vary a little bit, but that's about the scale. And throughout history, at various points, we've kind of crept up to that scale in terms of the influences that are happening on our lives of humans that we don't interact with or that we do interact with. And so the scope of human activity somewhere in the past couple hundred years surpassed human scale. So what I mean by that is, at the end of the 19th and beginning of the 20th century specifically, there was so much technological innovation that it became possible, or it actually became prevalent, that the forces acting on our individual lives and the people we came in touch with on a day-to-day basis were not anymore the people in our immediate surrounding, the people we interacted with, who we maybe grew up with, who we get to know throughout our lives, but people who we just meet shortly, or that we actually pass by, or that perform some kind of action that impacts us then without us even knowing the person. So the social transformation of these technologies was brutal in a sense. And specifically, I'm talking here about the industrialization, where we had mass production, mass transport, and mass communication. So in a sense, we had production at scale, converted from previous manufacturing, so working like as a craftsman, building something, maybe in concert with other people, but now standardized production, so like similar or identical items at scale. Then we had mass transport, so the infrastructure for the transport of goods and people was massively expanded, so that anybody or people could just travel much more easily, much more cheaply, and goods as well. So suddenly trade became much more powerful a force, because it was cheaper, quicker, and easier to transport a good from point A to point B, even if point B was miles and miles and miles away. And of course, mass communication facilitated both of those developments, because it made it possible for people to learn of something happening not just in their immediate surroundings, so what they are able to perceive with their senses, eyes, ears, etc., in their immediate surrounding, but something that happens far, far away. And so that, of course, is a huge influence on how people conduct their lives, if they're able to take into account information about what matters in their lives that is outside their immediate surroundings. So keep that in mind. And we're going to kind of analyze how these communication channels actually were set up. Then, of course, also democracy became a prevalent political system that it hadn't been before. Before that, we had mostly monarchies, a republic perhaps here and there, but that was the game. And the Second World War, also called the European Civil War, as a war of peoples instead of a war of monarchs, really cemented the spread of democracy as a prevalent political organization system. Because before that, wars between nations or between polities were mostly property disputes between monarchs who wanted either more from the other, or were trying to get something for nothing. But it wasn't really a battle of like nations or races in that sense, because at least not in Europe, because the monarchs were kind of the large property holders, and they were just engaging mercenaries or armies, like paying these armies to go and of course fight on their behalf, but they were paying them. It was not a kind of a race A against race B or nation A against nation B thing. At least not as much as with democracy, especially if you look at the Second World War, where the British bombed the German cities to break the popular support for Hitler. That was a very unique occurrence, unique occurrence, because that had not really happened that way before, where you purposefully attack the civilian population, because it's actually pretty valuable to have that civilian population intact if you are able to take over the country, because then you can tax them, you can benefit from it. So if you kill them, you kill the infrastructure, you kill the people, not necessarily very good. So as a consequence of this war, the country borders got defined and pretty much set in place. So as a consequence of that, the political orders that these countries were in after the Second World War pretty much froze in place, and the competition between polities now doesn't take place anymore on the territorial level, but on the kind of idea level, or idea level, specifically in the way that now the battlefield is not anymore the human flesh, but the human mind. So it gets transferred from the physical battlefield to the information sphere. So it's a war of ideas on the battlefield of the human brain. I kind of like that poetic shift. Now, in that battlefield of the human brain, those who control the public perception and opinion determine policy. And so we kind of have this shift, this interesting shift from the people who hold power by force, by the iron sword, to the people who talk, the people who are able to persuade, to control minds as well, and thereby determine where a certain country goes. So yeah, kind of to put it all in one point, symbolic communication, the public sphere over great distances becomes important. And today we have, of course, the rise of social media. We all know it, we all love and hate it at the same time. But what is interesting about it is that it's a shift from a previous communication structure of one-to-many. So if you think about radio, television, newspaper, these, even the printing press, these were all one-to-many communication channels where a specific entity, be it an organization or an individual, had to expend a certain amount of money to, or effort to get into possession of the distribution means and the production means, and then be able to spread their or his message. Now with social media, we have a fundamental shift. Of course, the internet also made that possible. Social media really kick-started or jumped that into high gear, a many-to-many communication infrastructure, thereby making this persuasion war, in a sense, a battlefield between everybody. It's not anymore these entities or corporations controlling that. And that's maybe also why you kind of see this constant battle of, or also like, this erosion of the center, in a sense, because people are constantly engaged in this battle of ideas. One more thing to note here is the visual communication. A picture is worth more than 1,000 words. Memes are pictures generally. Of course, they also have words on them, but that speaks to how well we are able to process pictures as compared to text. We're much better at recognition of virtual space than of glyphs, in a sense. So here's a kind of an overview of the first internet memes. It's a kind of strange selection, but you see here that it got started with the use of regular symbols on the keyboard, and then it migrated into stuff like this. These are kind of the mid-2000 memes, where it's just like a colorful background with an animal or a human or something like that. You can take a moment to go through them. I especially like the baby one, got into an argument, that I've practiced in the shower. Who hasn't experienced that? And from there then, it goes through many different iterations and it branches off into many different avenues. But here's kind of a postmodern version that I found recently, which is already kind of seeing this self-referential thing. When you look up and see text above you and realize that you're actually trapped inside of a meme. Yeah, beautiful. This is actually what also Peterson kind of talks about, Jordan Peterson, the Canadian professor, and that he exposes about the postmodernists. But the postmodernists, of course, have a point. Like they have a point that you can always step outside of a given context and then look at that context. So this is what we're seeing here. The meme itself references its own form. And then you have here kind of a contemporary political version about the Battle of Berkeley from the side of the alt-right or alt-light, or like the Trumpistas. If you're not aware of what this depicts or what happened there, basically there was a physical altercation between a group of Antifa and a group of Trump supporters or free speech activists or conservatives, like kind of a merry band of ragtag people. And yeah, so in that altercation, there was this one woman who got slapped, or yeah, actually hit by Nathan D'Amigo, the founder of Identity Europa, a advocacy group for Western civilization and identity. And in that picture here, it says Moldy Looks comes face to fist with equality. And you can see here already, oh, now it's turning into the memes are turning into usage, like basically weapons in the information war, taking a real world event, putting a narrative around it, making it kind of wink wink or funny or kind of if you get the joke thing, in a way to evoke sympathy for your own political perspective and thereby gather more followers to your cause. Now, this is kind of a rough mechanism that I saw somebody posting about how it worked in the Trump election. I'm not sure whether this is also how it works all the time, but this is kind of generally like 4chan is the space, this forum where you post anonymously by default. So you don't actually have to create an account when you post there. They only record your IP, which of course you can spoof via VPNs. And it's mostly an image board, so images are mostly used for communication, while of course text as well. And in that kind of maelstrom of exchange on 4chan, especially on the politically incorrect board, there's a huge kind of churn of content going on there. And so the content that doesn't catch attention very quickly, very immediately, gets out of view very quickly. And so it's kind of an evolutionary pressure in that space to create memes or pictures or any kind of content that captures the attention and evokes a reaction in the people that see it. So once kind of a few cycles of this have gone through on 4chan, the best outcomes of a particular meme or best versions of a particular meme get then posted on Reddit, where it's kind of a more of an internet techie audience that's beyond the politically incorrect sphere on 4chan. And from there, then it's spread through to Twitter and Facebook, and of course, kind of the end radio version of or kind of TV commentary version of the internet is YouTube commentary. So you see all these different YouTube channels then picking up the latest use of a meme on Twitter or the latest happening on a certain hashtag. And then that, of course, also gets re-spread on Facebook, Twitter, etc. Now, here is a case study that I have prepared. So, of course, many of you will have already heard of Pepe. Not all of you will have, but he's called the symbol of the resistance. And we actually could take a look at the video that is behind that. But we're not going to. I'm just going to go through this with you. You can watch it on your own. So Pepe was born in the e-comic Boys Club, and this is a non-political, easygoing kind of cartoon. But something about the general expression of Pepe and the kind of the shape and his attitude caught the zeitgeist or caught the attention of people and led to its popularity on 4chan, actually first in 2008, where it was very popular, and then 7 years later on Tumblr, the cesspool of internet political exchange, I guess, or anyways, social justice warriors, among other things. We see it becoming Tumblr's biggest meme. And since then, it's kind of spread into all kinds of spaces and is being used for all kinds of purposes. Now, of course, in the Trump election, that's really when it got spread to a mainstream audience through Twitter and through Facebook, after it got actually retweeted by Trump, as you see here. You can stamp the Trump. And then Hillary condemning that Trump retweeted it. You actually see here, this is a real site, it's still up. It's called Donald Trump, Pepe the Frog, and White Supremacists, an explainer. The cartoon frog is more sinister than you might realize. And in it, it's she's basically saying that it's a white supremacist meme. And while it has been used to that purpose, for example, there are Hitler versions of Pepe. There are also many other versions of Pepe that have nothing to do with white supremacy or even conservatism or alt-right, that are just an expression of that express a resistance against a predominant narrative. And as such, it has been used by people against the Catholic Church, by people against also conservatives, by any kind of group that wants to express their point of view against a predominant narrative, by basically saying, like, I'm smart, I know about what's going on, and I'm not impressed by your huff, uga, uga. And in this context, it's basically the alt-right saying, we're not impressed by your liberal cultural narrative and we don't take you seriously. Here's actually the reason why it got classified as a hate symbol in the Anti-Defamation League's database. You see, not very politically correct or even tasteful at all. So this is why it's been taken to this database. And but let's take a look at why and how this actually works. So from my perspective, it means that this meme, it exploits an offense-taking culture by intentionally posting offensive content with the express purpose of eliciting a negative emotional reaction in the consumer, who feels compelled to do so in order to preserve his claim to moral superiority. Now, every word in here is important, but it's really all about, as I said, like being in the resistance against a predominant narrative, and using this asymmetrical warfare tactic of expending very little effort by just posting this picture that evokes a disproportionate response in the other person that sees it, because they feel obligated to say this is not good, that is offensive, and thereby basically making the other side that you're trying to attack or denigrate expend more energy than you in discourse. And that way, you're slowly pushing the load onto the other side, and your rate of emotional well-being, I guess, your emotional well-being is much better off than the other persons or the other sides in general. Now, the effects. Let's take a look at the effects. This is a screenshot of the Great Meme War, a mock Wikipedia page that was put up by the Trumpistas, where you see kind of in the style of a military confrontation, the belligerents, the corners and leaders, and you can see here, especially here, at the belligerents level, where the entire American political establishment lost against a bunch of fucking idiots with computers. So you can already see, like, people are also using this in a very kind of self-denigratory way in order to signal that they don't even take themselves seriously. So why should anybody be taking them seriously? It's a very interesting tactic, making other people not take you seriously by not taking yourself seriously, but having a very serious intent behind what you're doing. And of course, this is then, or not of course, but this is actually what it has turned into. This is a real article from Wired called "Don't Look Now, but Extremist Meme Armies Are Turning into Militias." The link is also in here. And basically what's happened at what I already said, in Berkeley, this was the altercation where people who use these memes as coordination mechanisms to talk between themselves and to spread their own political viewpoint, then come into contact with the other side that does the same, but of course with their own political viewpoint. And these are mostly insular, or when they interact, they only interact in a zero-sum way. And then when they come into the real world, into the physical world, they also butt heads and it comes to altercations. So this should, don't know about scare, but it should definitely make you look up and make you try to be aware of what's happening there, because these things happen quickly in terms of what they turn into later on. And then recently in the French election, you also see that 4chan led to a public discussion by posting a legit hack of the campaign, similar to the Hillary emails. There was a leak of Macron emails, and but the curious thing here is that there were some legitimate documents in there, but then apparently there were also faked legitimate documents in there, and so you see again, it's this poisoning of a information medium or of a content in order to make the other side perform higher work or perform more work in pursuit of disproving or actually vetting that, and then having them expend more energy. You can also see here the beautiful use of pictures as a way to rally support around this topic and get people to comment. Now, how is this being used specifically? So the peer-to-peer structure of new media here is really key, because it allows groups to take the message that they want to convey to other people, put it into a medium that takes advantage of existing cultural narratives or tropes or kind of ways of thinking or experiences that people have, that a majority or many people have, in order to then turn it around and attack the predominant narrative, so that the cost of feeling secure in your view of the world is increased by orders of magnitude. And so what you do is you don't trust anymore the public sphere of information, and of course with your right, and that way you become prone to looking for either a group that you can trust, so and that will usually fall along your political biases, and then of course public authority figures, and in that way kind of the center erodes, like the center of exchange, or the center of looking at disparate political opinions and disparate information sources. That becomes difficult, not least because Facebook, Twitter, all these platforms where most of this content gets shared have algorithms that very specifically track how much time you spend viewing a particular post, whether you like something, whether you share something. All these things get aggregated and stored, and out of that then they make some evaluation and determine what next to show you in order to keep you on the platform by keeping your attention on similar kinds of posts. And that way you continuously go into this further and further and more extreme bubble. And so the only way to guard yourself against that is to specifically and consciously seek out sources of content that are from disparate groups. So what I, for example, do, not really by design so far, but by accident, is I have Facebook groups from all kinds of political biases. So, and not even political. So I have the transhumanists, I have the scientists, I have the Project Venus people, I have the libertarians, I have the alt left people. So across the spectrum and nowhere on the spectrum, that kind of keeps me a little bit on my toes, because I get served content that doesn't confirm my biases, while also getting the content of people that I personally agree with. And one more thing, of course, at the same time, it's also easier and cheaper than ever to construct and spread counter narratives. So basically what I said, you can construct a narrative simply by having a communication channel and consistently pumping out content that shares assumptions about a particular view of the world. One more important thing here, memes are inherently Darwinian. And of course, I've already alluded to that. The term itself comes out of the Darwinian information sphere or language. So what is important about that is that if a post or a picture or video doesn't persuade its audience, then it's not going to spread and it dies out. And so you have this constant battle between different pieces of content that capture the attention of their audience at better or worse rates and thereby get spread further or less far. And in that way, it's a decentralized process producing incredibly rapid evolution. And 4chan is the best example of it, especially because there's no social reputation points that you can rely on in order to establish some kind of authority, which means that you can only attract attention by virtue of the content being top-notch in terms of attracting attention, not necessarily in terms of quality of research or anything like that, although it could be, but just in terms of attracting attention. And then, of course, this provides, or not of course, but this provides a organic coordination mechanism to geographically diverse but otherwise homogeneous groups. So for the first time in our history, well, not really, but much more strongly now than ever, tribes can form around any number of preferences, values, ideas, or lifestyle choices. So you see Facebook pages, for example, there's a patriarchy Facebook page or a feminist Facebook page that draw from global audiences, not even necessarily from just one continent or from one country, that share a particular political viewpoint. Of course, there's also the beauty sphere, the beauty YouTube girls. Then there's the entertainers, the gamers. Like there are all these kind of groups that form around a particular set of choices or values, ideas or preferences, but that are geographically very diverse. And so the battle of ideas now has truly gone global. I already alluded to this earlier, but the human brain processes images much faster and differently than text. Images, and especially spatial and facial features, we are very good at recognizing and at processing quickly and efficiently. And so memes take advantage of that. They engage a different system than the text system, which is a very system 2 approach, whereas so the kind of the analyzing rational brain, whereas memes take advantage of your system 1 reaction, kind of the intuitive, the immediate, the one you can't really control. And through that, they offer a cheap and effective method of communicating and coordinating across large groups and distances. So what happens with these memes, you use a meme not anymore only to entertain yourself or others, but actually to define an in-group. If you got the joke about the moldy locks earlier in the Berkeley image, then that says something about you. And by virtue of you sharing that from somebody else who posted it, they will know that you share their assumptions, because you actually put your social reputation at stake when you share it, and thereby you declare yourself part of this group that has these same assumptions or these same views. So you see here, it becomes about defining the in-group and to raise the cost of other people being able to uphold their own narrative completely certainly, with complete certainty. And yeah, basically memes have gotten the attention now of the mainstream media. I actually want to go through a couple of these links. So Front National denies any role in the Great Meme War. This is an actual BBC contribution. We're going to watch it here.
That's him. That's the guy I've been trying to talk to. He's one of the major organisers of the France's group, the ones that are taking inspiration from the American alt-right.
Next to my handle I have three emojis. Next to my handle I have one is of a bacon strip, one is of a three emojis, one is of frog, one is of a glass of milk. The bacon strip is simply because Jews and Muslims cannot consume bacon, and the glass of milk is simply because white identity can be something as mundane as simply be able to be lactose tolerant. There is this phenomenon called frog Twitter, so it's just a way to show a sense of belonging and allegiance even.
Sur les pratiques en tant que telles qu'on a récupérées ou qu'on essaye de récupérer, c'est la pratique tout simplement de nouveaux réseaux sociaux comme Reddit par exemple, ou 4chan, qui sont des groupes extrêmement virulents, mais aux États-Unis on nous a appris à utiliser les réseaux sociaux pour faire passer nos idées. Donc finalement, en fait c'est la guerre entre les médias et les réseaux sociaux, de droite du moins.
There's only basically one major party that's extremely internet savvy. I would say the extreme right. They know how to maneuver and use this new language used by millennials. And one of the example I could give you is probably one of the most important personality in the extreme right today. Is called Mr. Filippo. He's a YouTuber, and in one of his videos, he ended his video with a mug. And under this mug, there was a little meme representing a risitas. The message behind that is incredible. He didn't have to say anything. It was a way of saying to this community of young people, 15 to 25, I speak your language. No other political opponent uses those men to try and bridge and create a bridge. But it's a fascinating phenomenon.
Have you heard of Pepe the Frog?
Pepe the Frog?
Have you heard of Pepe the Frog? What do you think of Pepe the Frog?
It's funny. It's for what?
Do you know what Pepe the Frog means?
Continue with the video. So let's take a look at the other links because they're actually interesting. You already saw allusions here to the Great Meme War of 2016, but this is again a YouTube video. We're not going to watch it, but take a look later on. And then we also have here an article by the New York Magazine. This is actually quite an impressive collection of viewpoints and kind of sources. So they did a huge effort to collect all kinds of memes, reference sources, individuals active in the scene, and to compile them into a set of essays. And here's the outcome of that. Let's let it load for a bit. There we go. Beyond Alt, the extremely reactionary, burn it down radical, newfangled far-right. Not sure what this is happening here, but we can, of course, go back. Let's go back. And then, of course, what happens when any kind of piece of content gets published about the alt-right, then the alt-right itself responds and uses that again to push their point of view by claiming, by crying foul, saying that they have been misrepresented, etc., or not taken seriously. And this is the general tactic also that Breitbart especially pioneered. They kind of have this general tactic of taking other people's news, looking at it, and then saying that this is wrong, or it doesn't take something seriously, or it has a biased viewpoint, and thereby using other people's work to very quickly be able to push out content and push their own viewpoint out. Yeah, that's the basic operating mechanism of right-wing media as well. Of course, there are also people who actually produce original content. I'm not going to say that, but it's a very effective technique for sure. And then we have here a question about the future, how it's going to happen. I see two kind of options, not really a third one. One is de-escalation and the other is escalation. And the de-escalation could work by implementing some kind of technological solutions. There is a startup, I think, called User Feeds that is trying to change the way that these algorithms take advantage of our attention. But the other option is adapted human behavior. So that's always more difficult and more cumbersome, but people have to adopt a more conscious use of how they engage with these technologies, understand more how these technologies actually work, and then use technology itself, use their own habits, their own ways of interacting with the technology in ways that further their own ends and that make them not prone to becoming overly politicized. And then, of course, the alternative to that is the filter bubble apocalypse, people getting more and more sucked into a specific point of view and it coming to more and more confrontation, bloody confrontation as well, as we've seen in Berkeley. And then to end the presentation, here is an extreme flyer from the left side also of the spectrum to show you it's not just the extreme right doing this, of course, the left is catching on. This is a flyer by the Antifa calling for the death of white children. So both sides have their lunatics among them. This one I've already shared. And then here is my personal creation from a couple years ago when I went to Chile. Not a person particularly disposed to taking selfies, and so when my friend Georgie, who enjoys doing that, takes a selfie with us, I was not particularly happy. All right, that's it from me. I would love to hear your thoughts, comments, feedback underneath the video. Take a look at the Evernote presentation that I've linked in the description if you want to pursue any of these links. And then, yeah, I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.